delay time. Hey guys, not sure how many we've got in the room, so let's just take a quick look. We're not going to be able to tell who's who we got on there. All we're going to be able to see is that we've got 5 people on at this current moment in time. There's a bit of a delay and lag, but I'm sure we'll all catch up with each other. So without any further rambling from me, I'm going to introduce Tara Halliday. I'll let Tara introduce herself to the group.
Okay, hi everyone. My name's Tara Halliday. I'm the founder of Complete Success Ltd, and I teach managing directors, ambitious managing directors, how to get the very best from their teams by giving them excellent one-to-one communication techniques. So one of the things that is very common in the team, the executive team, is something called imposter syndrome. And that's what we're going to be talking about today. Imposter syndrome is a very significant stress in people. It is the secret feeling of being a fraud and the fear of being found out. And what that does, not only for executives, but entrepreneurs, business owners, everyone, what it does is it creates an awful lot of stress and anxiety. It can lead to burnout, addiction, stress-related illnesses. There's an awful lot going on with it that's very negative, and it's the opposite of the success mindset. So if we're looking to be as successful as we possibly can and really reach our maximum potential, then it really does us well to take a good look at imposter syndrome. So that's what I'm going to be covering today. So should we start on the slides?
Yeah, can we just, before we go any further,
Sure.
can you read just a few comments? Are you hearing us okay? Or are you able to see us okay? Or are we coming through? Just before we go any further, just to make sure. Can we have a few comments in the comment box, please, guys? Okay, yeah, Rehan's typing in there. All good, all good. There's 5 people in. Okay, obviously the other 4 are very shy. They're not saying anything. All right, then, right. We're going to get started. I'm sure there'll be all the 7 in now. We've got a few more coming in. So we're about to start. Let's just put this on. Kill that. Kill that there. Right, okay, over to you, Tara.
Right, so we need to share
right.
the
Now this is going to be the tricky bit now. We need to find out whether our slides are going to work or not. So this is something we haven't done yet, so you have to bear with us, and hopefully we're going to be able to get you the slides. So do tell us if the slides come up. Slides. Okay, now let's just give it a few seconds for the lag. Okay, yes, right, it's working. We're in business.
Excellent. Right, so as I said, what we're going to be talking about is imposter syndrome. It's that secret feeling of being a fraud and the fear of being found out. Now, what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to start with a question, and I don't really want you to answer it right now because we're going to circle right back to it at the end. But the question is one of those old-fashioned motivational ones, which is, what would you do if you knew that you couldn't fail? And the idea of failure and what failure means is really at the heart of imposter syndrome. So I'm just going to let that one percolate in your mind for a while, and then I'm going to take you through everything about imposter syndrome this evening. And what we'll get to at the end is some very useful ways that you can reduce the stress in yourself and the people around you and really get the best out of yourself as well and make you very successful. So the stress and anxiety of imposter syndrome leads to all sorts of unhelpful situations. So it leads to exhaustion, addictions, burnout, stress-related illnesses, and people just quitting. People will quit their job, or they won't put themselves forward for a promotion, or they'll close their business because it's just simply too much. Now, imposter syndrome affects 70% of highly successful people at some point in their lives. It was first documented in 1978 with female postgraduate students. And what was reported was that these postgraduate students, although they had got in on their own merits, they felt like they didn't belong there. They felt like somehow that they'd fooled someone, they tricked someone, they just got lucky, that they'd been extra charming, that there'd been some sort of administrative error. And for all those reasons, they felt like they really didn't belong, and they had an anxiety that at some point, someone was going to come along and say, hey, you're not supposed to be here. You're not good enough to be here. And when it was first documented, it was thought that it was mostly women. But when they finally did some studies that were completely anonymous, it turned out it was 50-50, equally men and women. So it's not a women's issue at all. So imposter syndrome has three big problems. The first problem is we don't talk about it. So it's a secret. You know, obviously, if we fear that someone's going to find us out, we're not going to go talking about it. And what this does is it makes it feel like it's just us. And that leads to a feeling of isolation. It makes it feel even worse. The second problem with imposter syndrome is that it's confusing, because it affects 70% of highly successful people. They're capable, they're competent. And when you're one of those persons, you say, well, what is wrong with me? There's something that feels fundamentally wrong with me, because I'm feeling this way, and yet outwardly, and everyone says I've got all this success and these great results. So we feel like we're flawed. There's a feeling of, why don't I feel successful? And when are people going to find out that I'm not actually that good? The third problem with imposter syndrome is that if we don't know what the cause is, then there's nothing we can do about it. It feels like, well, we're helpless to do anything. So not only when we have imposter syndrome do we feel the stress and anxiety, but we also feel isolation, we also feel confusion, and we feel helpless. And that is definitely not a success mindset. That is not the kind of mindset that will allow you to really reach your peak performance and get the very most and achieve the very most that you can. So we're going to sort all that out today. Firstly, we're going to talk about it, which is great. And what you'll find through the course of this webinar is that it's actually a lot of people. And it can be really quite a relief to know it's not just you, and it's not you being different somehow. I'm going to explain all about the symptoms of imposter syndrome, and then the triggers. There are two main triggers for imposter syndrome, because it's not constant all the time, it comes and goes. There's two main triggers, and then there's one underlying cause, and we'll come to that as well. And that's going to put an end to the confusion. And then finally, knowing what the cause is, well, then we can do something about it. It gives us a direction, something to address in our own lives. So at the end of this webinar, I'm going to be giving out some tips and tools and ways that you can either completely eliminate imposter syndrome or reduce the effects in your life. And then you can really be the success that you're already capable of. So we'll go through this, we'll take a couple of breaks for Q&A, and then we'll have some more Q&A at the end as well.
Sure,
yeah,
sure.
Okay, lovely. Right, so I'll go into the fundamental belief of imposter syndrome. This is the one that underlies absolutely everything. It has several layers, so we'll come back to this one image. We've got the water, it's the deep meaning image, but this is about meaning. So the fundamental belief that drives imposter syndrome is that I am not good enough. Not good, because remember, this is very successful people, but I'm not good enough. Somehow there's a standard that we're holding ourselves to that's too high, and in fact it's perfection. So we've got this idea that we should be this perfect ideal, and for some reason, you know, we don't match that, and so we feel that we're not good enough. So example, in somewhere, I might be a out of a scale of 10, my skills might be a 9. And then, but what I'm looking at is I'm looking for a 10, a perfect, and I don't value the 9, the value, the competence that I already have. All I see is the gap between the 9 and the 10, and that's kind of the error in thinking in imposter syndrome. So we'll drill deeper and deeper into this as we go along. So what imposter syndrome is actually a larger, a smaller part of a larger issue. And we're going to get that as we go further in, and we've explored imposter syndrome, then we'll address what that larger issue is. Now, what I wanted to say here is that we're going to be talking about emotional pain and stress, and it might stir something up for you. You might start to feel very uncomfortable. I'm going to keep the mood light and factual, but I know this is very tender, and it can be a little bit overwhelming. If you start to feel overwhelmed, sit back, breathe slowly. If you need to exit. We'll be recording this, so you can always come back to it again. If you hang on in there, we've got some great solutions at the end of it. But if not, you can just contact Mo, get in contact with me, and we can have a chat, because what I want everyone who's listening to know is you're not alone in this. Nobody needs to be alone. In the end, it's a very human thing, and as you'll see, just about everyone experiences it, and so it's really high time that we talked about it. So I'm going to go through the 3 parts of imposter syndrome. First, I'm going to talk about how we experience it as an individual. One of the confusing things is it looks very different in very different people. And then I'm going to talk about the 2 triggers and the 1 cause, and then we'll finally get to the solutions. So I think first, if we talk about what imposter syndrome is not, because there's even some confusion about what it is and what it isn't. So imposter syndrome is not about being a fraud. Being a fraud is actually going into a property networking meeting and telling somebody you've got 20 properties when you have 1 or none. That's just plain lying. It's putting qualifications on your CV that you don't have. It's talking about positions that you haven't actually held. That is actually being a fraud. That's not what imposter syndrome is at all. Imposter syndrome is the feeling like you're a fraud even though you're not. Imposter syndrome is also not incompetence or lack of ability. Again, we're talking about very competent, capable people here. So it's not a lack of ability, also not a lack of confidence. And there's quite a lot of information around imposter syndrome and mistaking it for being a lack of confidence, but it's actually not. Because we're talking about successful people who are confident. You would meet them and they're bright, they've lots of energy, they're very, very capable people. So it's not a lack of confidence, and neither is it low self-esteem. If it was low self-esteem, they wouldn't be successful already. So it's not that either. And the reason that this can be so confusing is if we think that imposter syndrome is about confidence or self-esteem, then that's where it gets even more confusing. Society judges all of these things. It judges low self-esteem, it judges lack of confidence as somehow being weak or not, or flawed or something like that. And so what can happen is that if people think imposter syndrome is this, then there's an element of shame and embarrassment about it, and that makes them even more reluctant to talk about it. So if you just clear off, it's not any of those at all. So I think probably if I give you a case study, I'm going to give you an example of Daniel. This isn't a photograph of Daniel, and obviously I'm changing all the names, so everything's completely confidential. So Daniel was a successful lawyer, and at the age of 30, he got headhunted by a prestigious London law firm for a top-notch legal team to serve their most valuable clients. In his first week, the team was set a very tricky legal scenario, and it was Daniel who found the solution. And when he found the solution, and of course everyone was congratulating him, he said, "Oh, I was just lucky. I got lucky with that." Now, that sounds like it's just someone being genuine and humble and nice, but actually he genuinely believed that it was just luck, because he didn't feel that he had that capability. So if he had to do it again, he wouldn't. The fact is, he would have, because he's capable, but that's just the mental thinking in that. Daniel also worked exceptionally hard, call it high standards, but actually he worked harder than the situation called for. And the reason for that is that he never wanted to be caught out making a mistake. He never wanted to be asked a question where he didn't know the answer. So he put way more time and effort into his work than it warranted, and that led to him being more exhausted. And in fact, he was completely perfectionist. He was a complete perfectionist, and again had that ideal that he should be this standard. And if he wasn't, then that belief again that he wasn't good enough. So again, it's not about being good, but he wasn't good enough if he wasn't perfect. And so what that meant was he was intolerant of his mistakes. And sometimes he'd lie awake in bed agonizing about a mistake he'd made that day, because we all make mistakes. Or he'd wake up with a jolt in the middle of the night going, oh, I can't believe I did that. And that's, again, more stress. One of the other things that was asked of Daniel was to give his legal opinion in cases. So they want your formal legal written opinion on particular cases. And Daniel really didn't want to give them. The reason being that if he gave his genuine opinion and it got criticized and he was somehow not good enough for his opinion, then he would feel it as meaning something about him. So what he did instead was he went and took snippets out of legal textbooks and arranged them in a way that he thought that his bosses wanted to see, so that if it got criticized, then it was, well, it was just this compilation. It wasn't really him. So that's a way that he was hiding who he really was, but also from his employer's point of view, although they weren't aware of what he was doing, from his employer's point of view, they weren't getting the best out of him. He really was a genuinely exceptional lawyer, and they weren't getting the best out of him because of he wanted to hide his genuine opinions. Another thing that made him feel isolated was his background. So he was in London and he'd come from up north, so he had a strong accent, and that helped him feel less connected to the people around him, more isolated, more different. Also, he came from a very poor background, and many people would say, wow, how brilliant to come from such a poor background and do so well. But that's not how he felt about it, because his family had felt very ashamed of their poverty, and he did as well. And when he turned up and joined this legal team, all his colleagues were second and third generation barristers. They'd had very different lives from him, and it's another way that he felt isolated. So what started to happen is he dreaded going into work, because it was always the feeling like, today's the day they're going to find out that I shouldn't be here, that I don't belong here, that I'm not good enough. So he got anxious and exhausted, stressed, and after 2 months he quit. And that ended this very high-flying career that he might have had. And what's interesting is that his employer and his colleagues knew absolutely none of this. It was a complete mystery why he quit. And that's what imposter syndrome looks like. It's all within that. It was within the individual person, and it's not something that most people can see from the outside. So underlying it all is he's capable and he's competent, but he feels like he's not good enough. So if I go through the...
Can we just sort of pause there for a moment and go to the group to see what, is that okay with you?
Sure, yeah.
We can just sort of stop sharing. We'll go back to screen just to see what comments, questions we've got, guys. Just coming back to the screen. Okay. Can we have a few comments, see who's following and who's not and who's disappeared? Guys, are we still there? I know we've been fluctuating with the numbers. We can't see the true numbers in here because some of you are viewing from Facebook and others, so we can't really see that. So can we have a few comments in the comment box? Any comments that you have or anything that's not clear? A bit of a lag at the moment, so I have to give them time.
All made sense, but it's too early to make any comments.
There's some bit I missed that. Oh, okay, that's Rihanna. Okay, it seems to be Rihanna's the only one making comments. Just make sure there's nothing else in there.
Okay.
Okay, guys, we're just going to carry on then. So we're all on board, all understanding what we're saying, making sense. So we're going to go back to the PowerPoint, if we can. Okay, back to the slides. Over to you, Tara.
Right, okay. So what we've got here is a list of the most common symptoms of imposter syndrome. In that example, Daniel had a lot of those. So perfectionism is one, that standard that we're holding ourselves to that's basically impossible. Where we're holding ourselves to being perfect, and we can't. We're human. We're not going to be perfect. But it's that expectation that we need to be perfect, and if we're not, then there's something wrong with us. Over preparing, as I said, as a way to not risk being challenged and making mistakes, and in being intolerant of our own mistakes, keeping us awake at night. So there's avoidance of imposter syndrome situations. That one didn't happen with Daniel. So what this is, if there is a particular situation, it triggers our imposter syndrome. We do become aware of it. A lot of this is subconscious, but we do become aware of it, and we'll tend to avoid a particular situation to stop the trigger happening. And this will make more sense further on down through the webinar. But in avoidance is one of the ways that imposter syndrome showed up in me. So I'll talk a bit more about that in a little bit. The anxiety part of it is something that's pretty constant. It's a continual looking over your shoulder, waiting for someone to come and tap you on the shoulder and say, "Oi, you, out, you don't belong here." That's the kind of feeling that it is. There's making excuses for success. So as Daniel said, I just got lucky finding that particular solution to the legal problem. Or as the female postgraduate students are saying, maybe it's just some kind of administrative error that they were there, that somebody had helped them, so it wasn't really them, or, it was good timing, or they just got lucky. All of that kind of things is making excuses for the success. So when people would compliment someone with imposter syndrome, it wouldn't sink in. It's like, oh yes, well there's so many reasons why, and you get a list of reasons why. So procrastinating is something that is also a symptom of imposter syndrome. Not all forms of procrastinating, but imagine this: you've got a presentation tomorrow, and you've been procrastinating, so you've now got to spend all night preparing for this presentation in the morning. And so you do that, and you arrive at your presentation, and you're disheveled and over-caffeinated and exhausted, but you have the presentation. Now, if the presentation went poorly, then what you could say to yourself was, "Oh well, that wasn't my best. That was the all-nighter, right? So that wasn't actually really representative of me and what I'm capable of." And this is a way of hiding. It's another way of hiding, you see. If I don't do my best work, then you can't. If I get criticized, then it's not really me. It's not really my best. But the other side of this is if this presentation goes well, and they are complimented for it. Now you think they'd say, "Oh, great, thank you very much. Yes, I'm very pleased." No, there's no ownership of the success. The feeling with this imposter syndrome is, wow, I fooled them again. I've got away with it again, and then the anxiety continues because maybe next time I won't, and that's really one of the stresses. And then finally, another symptom of imposter syndrome is comparing ourselves to other people. But what we do is compare how we feel on the inside to how everybody else is looking on the outside. So if you imagine, 10 people sitting in a room having a meeting, 7 of them will be familiar with or experienced with having imposter syndrome. Now we're sitting there and it's just me, right? It's only me who feels this way. Everybody else is looking great. They're looking calm and confident. In fact, we look calm and confident from the outside as well. But we don't appreciate that there are so many people who feel the same way. So we see everyone else, this is the impression, everybody else is doing so well and we're not. And then that comes back to our meaning, I'm not good enough. Now we take this a level deeper, and with imposter syndrome, you see, imposter syndrome isn't about everything. It's not like we feel this way about everything. It's usually just one thing. Sometimes it's 2 or 3, but it's usually just one thing that we don't feel we're good enough about. And this can be anything. I'm talking today about business situations, careers, but it can be in terms of anything at all: musical skill, fitness, qualifications, parenting. So imagine, well, it depends a lot on your upbringing and what was valued in your home and what was approved of and what was disapproved of. So you can kind of sometimes see the pattern there. So for example, if you were brought up in a very musical family and all your siblings and parents sang like angels, played multiple instruments, and you were a bit tone deaf, and you really didn't have a good sense of rhythm. You weren't very talented at playing. That might be something that you might feel meant something about you. That one thing, you're not good enough, and then when you're not good enough, that means something about me. Somehow I'm not as worthy as a person. I have less value because I'm not good at that one thing. So this is the layers just stepping deeper and deeper. This is one of the reasons that successful people get confused about imposter syndrome, because they feel so comfortable with lots of other aspects of their lives, but there's just this one thing that they don't feel that really works for them, that they feel bad about. So let's go into a bit more of that good enough. So I've got here a few things that typically these are quite common for people to feel not good enough about. Because we'll start with income actually. I've got income, leadership, knowledge, social skill and intelligence. If we start with income, this is a scale of how good we feel about this. Now you can have high income or low income and be completely comfortable with either. In which case that wouldn't be imposter syndrome. You wouldn't be measuring yourself or your standard against how much money you have. However, if you have imposter syndrome and it's around income, then you're going to make the conclusion that I need as much money as possible to prove that I'm good enough. So I think it's quite a classic, actually, a cliche rather. You have somebody who feels that they need to get £1 million and then they'll feel good enough. And then they get to £1 million and they still don't feel good enough. So maybe the solution is to go to £10 million and maybe then they'll feel good enough, and on. And you keep trying to get enough. Again, it's this idea of perfect. Yeah, if I just had enough money, then I would be good enough. But it's a movable thing because it's not about the money. It's about how we're feeling. Leadership is something. Actually, this little graph here would probably describe how comfortable or uncomfortable I was when I was at the age of 30. So leadership was where I really had my imposter syndrome. And specifically that was in, because there's lots of things around leadership, but that was specifically in the persuading people to do something that they didn't necessarily want to do. I wasn't skilled at it, and anytime I tried to do that, I felt terrible about it. I really felt like I was fundamentally bad and flawed. So I'll go into that a little bit more detail later. So knowledge is basically, if you've met anyone who just has to know absolutely everything, they know all the facts, they're like an encyclopedia, they always have to be right, they'll argue till they're blue in the face, that's someone who's classically feeling that they need to have perfect knowledge, perfect information to be good enough. And that was what was happening with Daniel. He felt that he needed to have this perfect legal knowledge. Social skill is another one. This one comes up quite often. You see, again, you can be highly socially skilled, or you can be pretty clumsy around people and be comfortable with either. But with imposter syndrome, then you always feel that whatever level you're at, you're not good enough. So I have another example now of Jason. Jason, again, very talented, bright, smart, capable, confident man. But he didn't feel comfortable about his social skill. He didn't feel that the skills he had socially were good enough. So the idea of a networking meeting or a party really would fill him with dread. So what he did is he would avoid the situation. And he didn't do this consciously. So much of this is below the radar. But what he did is he started off in business, and he started up a business in IT and web design, and all his interactions with customers was over the internet or by email. And so what he was doing there, he was avoiding the situations in which he'd feel really uncomfortable and not good enough about his social skill. Intelligence is quite a common one. Again, people need to feel that they are good enough, they are smart enough. And it doesn't depend on whether you're smart or less smart. It's whether you feel that you're good enough. So I have another example of Ahmed. He grew up with 4 older brothers, and his father put an awful lot of value on qualifications. And his 4 older brothers just did brilliantly, and they were very, very qualified. And Ahmed he was okay, you know, he got through university okay, and he just didn't shine as brightly as his brothers did. When he got into the work environment, then it started to really bother him, and that's when his imposter syndrome kicked in, because he felt he wasn't good enough to do his job, even though he was, but he wasn't good enough unless he had more qualifications. So what he did is he spent the next 30 years going on course after course, getting certifications, and he's got qualification after qualification, and always the feeling is that's not enough. Maybe if I get another one, I'll feel better. So it's very similar to the money issue. That idea, if I get more, that will solve how I'm feeling emotionally, and it really doesn't.
Can I just interrupt there for a moment? Sure. This is quite a common reoccurring actually thing within coaches, consultants, mentors, trainers, where they are more than adequately qualified in most cases, but it's always, I've got to complete this course, I've got to get this certificate, I've got to get that certificate, and for whatever reason they just keep delaying, putting off the inevitable, which is to go and interact with the people that they're capable of finding solutions for.
Yes, that's exactly it, because they don't feel like they've got enough to feel like they can really do the job.
So what would they need to do to overcome that? How would you sort of, if we get coaches, mentors, consultants, trainers out there who are going through that but don't realize that what this is all down to the syndrome, that they're fake under whatever pretenses, that they're allowing themselves that title or whatever position that they're in there, and they're not going out, seeing people really and helping people with the knowledge and the skill set that they already have. They don't need any more certifications.
Yeah, exactly. Well, the solution to it is to find what's actually underneath this, because imposter syndrome is a symptom of something that's larger, and we'll get to that later.
Good.
Then there'll be the how to deal with this and how to deal with social skill and leadership and income intelligence.
Excellent.
So we'll get to that.
Okay, Tara, I'm sorry about that.
That's okay. No, it's great. It's good. I have one more example in this, and actually it's me. I'll use myself as an example. So I mentioned that I wasn't comfortable with my leadership when I was younger. So when I graduated with my bachelor's degree, I got offered a job with a very large international engineering firm, and because of the psychological profile that they did, they said, right, we're not just going to put you on a graduate trainee program, we're going to put you on a super fast track, which of course would have led me into, a leadership position very, very young, very early on. Now, I was not aware of this at all. So what I told myself was, oh, that sounds boring. Again, this is what we do, we tell ourselves things. And then I had a friend of mine from college who was just about to sign up for a PhD program. And I thought, oh, well, if he can do it, so can I. You see, for me, my studies, I was comfortable about. I never felt that I wasn't good enough. I felt it was okay. I'm not the top person, but I was comfortable with where I was. So what I did is this is how I got my PhD. I signed up for a PhD because of imposter syndrome, because I was avoiding the leadership. And I only realized that years later. Now, there'll be other people who would sign up for the PhD program, like Ahmed, because he would need to prove that he was good enough in his intelligence. So you can see people can be doing the same thing, but the underlying reasons for it are very different, and they can also be not obvious, not obvious to us at all. So I take the meaning one step deeper. So I've got the belief that I'm not good enough. It's usually about one thing, and that means something about me. And the something that it means is if I make a mistake in this one thing, then I am a failure. Not what I have done is a mistake, but I am a failure, and therefore I'm worthless. So this belief goes right down to a deep feeling of worthlessness very, very quickly, and that's kind of a motivator that comes from a deeply emotional place.
Can we just go back to the people there and see any comments or anything from them for a moment? We'll just... Right, guys, is everybody getting this at the moment? What sort of questions have we got? Any concerns? Anything in there that not quite clear that you would like Tara to share with you or explain in more detail? No, everybody's going to have a replay and watch this later on, obviously, by the looks on it. Nobody wants to comment. Okay, good. They're coming on slowly. Very good. Welcome to the group, Chris. Nice to have you in. How to resolve the procrastination with the syndromes.
We can get to that.
Good, good. Makes sense. Any questions? Anything else? We're going to get to your bit, Rehan, as we go down further on. We'll have some answers for you. Tara will have an answer for you. So as long as we're making sure you haven't fallen asleep or drifted off, we're just checking on you. Okay, we're going to go back to the slides and carry on from that. Okay, over to you, Tara.
Excellent. So what I'd like you to do now is we're going to now look at the deeper levels of this and the more details of imposter syndrome. So imagine that you have been learning to ride a horse for the last 6 months. Yeah, you've gone straight from walks, and now you're going to do your first gallop. So it's very exciting. You've got the sun on your face. You're getting faster and faster, and the horse moves from the canter to the gallop. There's the wind streaming through its mane, and it's just fantastic. You're feeling great. And then all of a sudden, some crazy guy leaps up in front of the horse in this white outfit with rags and bells. It's a Morris dancer. Yes. And of course horses don't like Morris dancers, so the horse rears up, throws you off, you fall to the ground, and you break your arm. Now the question that I would ask would be, what caused you to fall off the horse and break your arm? And you could have some ideas. It might be that I knew that you're an inexperienced horse rider. This is the first time you've done a gallop. You could say that it's the horse's fault, because if it was a motorbike, it wouldn't be bothered by Morris dancers. Yeah, but we're horse riding, not motorcycle riding. You could say it was the Morris dancer, doing some crazy thing in front of a horse that startles the horse. All of those are just situational triggers. If you're thinking about this in terms of imposter syndrome, the real reason that you fell from the horse is gravity. And that's not a trick answer. This is actually what's happening with imposter syndrome, and there's an underlying issue that's going on that is so consistent. It's like gravity. Gravity, we don't notice it, we don't pay attention to it. Nobody says, hey, watch out for the gravity today. It's so consistent that we don't even see it or pay attention to it. We just kind of work around it. We never acknowledge it. And there's an issue around the fundamental issue of imposter syndrome is just like gravity. So what I'll do now is I'll go through the 2 triggers, and then we'll get to that cause that is just like gravity. So the first trigger is a stretch. So anytime that we do something that's out of our range of normal familiarity, when we're doing something new, we're challenging ourselves, we're exploring something different, what happens then is, because we're less familiar with it, we're more likely to make a mistake. And if we make a mistake in that one area that's your imposter syndrome, then we quickly go from making a mistake to feeling like a failure to feeling worthless. So, for example, if you're a baker and you bake for 30 years the same bread every single morning, and tomorrow you're going to go and bake the same bread and the same cakes, that wouldn't be a stretch for you, so it's not going to trigger any kind of imposter syndrome. If you then decided you were going to enter the Great British Bake Off competition and you had to create some exotic fancy pastries, that would be a stretch, and then it might trigger if there was a sense around there that your failure might be about you. But not stretching isn't really a solution, because there's a great joy and satisfaction from the stretch, from achieving more, from doing more, from trying something that's beyond your current capability and succeeding. It's one of the joys of life. So not stretching is not an issue. It's not really an option. Some people don't stretch because of their imposter syndrome. For example, they might not go for a promotion because they don't want to risk it. They or in their business, they might not go for a certain level of income because they don't want to risk it. And what they're not wanting to risk is that feeling of being a failure and therefore worthless. So stretch is one of the triggers, and just knowing that, it means every time that you do stretch, you do challenge yourself more, you can just be a bit more aware of it and just a bit more conscious of what's going on. So the second trigger is the work environment. So again, this is all around the issue of making mistakes and feeling like a failure. So if you have a particular work environment where your bosses highly critical, judgmental, blaming, scapegoating. Anytime anyone makes a mistake, there's anger and all sorts of fallout. That I would call a critical work environment. And that's the kind of work environment that will trigger imposter syndrome, because people will be afraid of making mistakes because it would be such a big deal. And if it's in that particular area where you've got your imposter syndrome, then you're going to be, even if you don't make any mistakes, you're going to be hyper vigilant the whole time. You'll just be waiting for the other shoe to drop. So what can we do about a work environment? Well, if we're the leader, if we're the managing director, or we're the CEO, and we're leading our team, then we can do something different. We can change the working environment to make it one where mistakes are treated as learning experiences and not as something that people need to be punished for. And when you do that, then you really can decrease the incidence of imposter syndrome. You can just reduce it. If you're an employee, you have far fewer choices. You can either stay and tough it out, or you can leave. That's really your only two choices. So this is the kind of thing that causes people to leave. So if you've got high attrition rate in a company, then, and it's your company, you might want to look at the environment that you have around people making mistakes. The other thing is, if you leave a company, one of the things to really be very good to check out about your any new employer would be their work environment and how mistakes are treated in there. So you can do a bit of research and maybe talk to some of the other staff, and then you can avoid signing up to a company that might trigger your imposter syndrome. All right, so then that's the two triggers. And then the one underlying cause is our worth. And I'll get to exactly what that worth looks like. So as I said, we went from mistake to failure to feeling worthless. So there's an idea that our worth is based on what we do. So I'll explain this in a little bit more detail. Now, this is the idea that's like gravity. This is the thing that underlies our whole society. People don't acknowledge it. So there's no one to blame for it, because everyone's experienced it, everyone's brought up like it, their parents were brought up like it. We get it from everywhere. And we learn it at a very, very young age. And what we learn is that when I'm good and clean and tidy and obedient, then the people around me will be smiling and praising me and approving of me. So we learn that when I do things right, when I get things right, I'm good. Not I've done things right, but I am fundamentally good. I feel valuable. I feel worthy. And then if we get things wrong, make a mistake, we're noisy, we're inconvenient, we track mud across the kitchen floor, yeah, then the reaction to us changes, and we might get frowns or disapproval. And you know, sometimes, depending on your childhood, you might get extreme anger and sometimes violence. But even the smallest hint of disapproval, which is like a sigh, a roll of the eyes, communicates exactly the same thing. That when we make a mistake, when we do something wrong, then we're bad. Our child's minds can't differentiate between our behavior and our actual worth. And so what we learn is that our worth is based on what we do. And this is the thing that underlies all of imposter syndrome, and it's even larger than that. It underlies pretty much every amount of stress, every form of stress that we experience. All comes down to this. And this was actually documented in the 1950s by Dr. Carl Rogers. And he said that to be happy, to be successful, to reach a real maximum human potential, we need to grow up with a sense of our unconditional worth, that we're completely worthy whether we make a mistake or not. Now, so your worth is based on what you do is a lie. So that's what's really true here. That this is a lie. This is a lie we're taught, that we believe and we've grown up with. In the 1990s, Dr. Greg Bear developed some very practical ways to change this belief in adults. It takes a long time. It's very intensive work, 6 months to 2 years, very deep transformational work, but it is possible. Now, not everybody wants to do that, or is prepared to do that, but it is possible. And he also found that only 1 in 100,000 children come out of childhood with a sense that they're unconditionally worthy. So effectively, this is everyone, and it'll show up, it'll pop up every now and then in imposter syndrome, but it underlies an awful lot of other stresses as well. So what I'm going to go through now is ways to reduce imposter syndrome, so you don't have to do the deep intensive work, but there's actually quite a lot that you can do to reduce it. When you know that this is at the cause, now you can focus on something. Now you can do something to undo that lie, that belief that your worth is based on what you do, think, or say. So we'll start with ways to reduce imposter syndrome awareness. So just the fact that you've listened to this webinar and you've got this information, now you know more about the cause of imposter syndrome, that it's not just you, it's just everyone, it's just happens to be showing up as imposter syndrome for you right now. And that can lead to a sense of relief that, you know, it's not just me, we don't feel so isolated. One of the things that we can do is stop comparing. So this is a very practical thing. Because when we're comparing how we feel on the inside to how everybody else is looking on the outside. Now, I've got a picture of 10 women here, and they all look, you know, professional, energetic, put together, confident, having fun, right? So if we compare, if I'm feeling terrible and not good enough, worthless about myself, and I look at them, I think it's just me. So no comparing, because if we go through the statistics, 2 out of 10 of those highly successful women are alcoholics, functional alcoholics. In the medical world, 1.5, let's say 2, is addicted to prescription drugs. 2 out of 10 are depressed, and 2 to 3 of them had an eating disorder at university. And that's just a few statistics. There's all sorts of other ways that people are stressed out. So you can pretty much take it, everybody's got something going on in their lives. Everyone's got some way that they're trying to cope with this idea that, you know, that they're not good enough, that they're worthless, and it just shows up, it pops up in different ways. So if you can learn to not compare yourself, yeah, with the people, I think Facebook is really bad for this, because
I think all social media is, because I think with social media, funny enough, I put a post up about vanity and stuff like that earlier on. Is a typical sort of thing. I mean, at what point, in most places, each person's trying to shout louder than the other person, say, I'm better than him, I'm better than her, and it becomes a competitive race. And even when people don't have anything to say of any worth, they will continue to either put images up with little meaning and no explanation. And this again comes back, I would imagine, back to the fake syndrome sort of scenario,
yeah.
Or feel that inside us that there's something lacking.
That's it. That's exactly it. The comparing is an idea that one person can be better than another. And the fact is, we're all, it's just incredible miracles. Like the day we were born, we were this incredible miracle, perfectly lovable, perfectly worthy, and nothing's changed since the day you were born to right now. We're still that. So nobody is any better and nobody is any worse. So if we have that idea, then that helps. And yeah, Facebook, people will post these pictures of, you know, happy smiling couples, happy smiling families. They don't post pictures of their fights. Right?
Yeah.
Yeah, they'll post pictures of, you know, nights out together. They don't show the person who's drunk too much throwing up in the gutter outside. That just doesn't reach it. So it propagates this idea that everyone else is doing so much better than me, and then it just serves to help to make us feel more isolated. And the fact is that nobody's better than anyone else, and don't believe everything you see from Facebook.
Well, social media,
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So there's more that we can do to reduce imposter syndrome. You see, now we can understand what it is, that it's this idea that our worth is based on what we do, and that's a lie. Then it kind of takes the emotion out of it, and we can really see it for what's going on. So sometimes it's a lack of skill. So remember I mentioned where I had imposter syndrome and avoided getting into any situations where I was a leader. Now, where that came from was that when I was growing up, my family demonstrated a particular style of leadership. Nothing about them, because that's what they were taught. There's an idea that you can't be what you haven't seen. This is particularly true when you're growing up through childhood. What you see around you is normal. That's the way people react. So in my family, when you try to persuade someone to do something they didn't necessarily want to do, the strategies were demands, control, criticism. That was the toolbox that I had. Now, personally, I have my own personality. I have a lot of empathy and compassion for people. I want them to be happy. I want them to be comfortable. And I found it when I was in the Girl Guides, actually. They made me a patrol leader, and suddenly I had to get the girls in my patrol to do something when they wanted to do something else. And the only tools that I had was this command, control, demand, criticize, which to me felt like taking a house brick and hitting someone over the head. I mean, it felt horrible. And I felt like a horrible person. I felt like I'm worthless, I'm not good enough. And the actual problem was that I lacked the skill. Yeah, I hadn't seen it. Now, when I was in my 30s, I had this fantastic boss, this CEO who was just amazing with people. And I was in awe of him because he was just brilliant. But I didn't see that as, oh, that's something that I can learn to do. I went straight to the comparing to, he's just a better person than me. He's just nice. And if I tried to do that, I'd just mess it up, and I'd be horrible. And that's how I felt. Now, when I can take the emotions like that and say, okay, actually what's going on is there's just a skill gap. I've never actually learned how to lead in a way that was positive and supportive. And so that's what I have since done. And so if you've identified the issue, or one of the issues is a skill gap, now you can take the feeling out of it, the emotion out of it, and say, okay, let's just get on with learning. Your issue is, I haven't got enough qualifications. Don't do any more learning. That's not your issue. That's not your issue at all.
I think one of the other things we find a lot of the people who end up doing same old, and as you earlier on mentioned, is again, I call it with a slightly different sort of coin phrasing, is we have our toolbox, which is our abilities, what we're able to do at this moment in time, versus our capabilities. And the capabilities, again, is again stretching ourselves. Do we want to stretch ourselves to our capabilities? My ability at this moment in time, I can't fly a plane, but I'm capable. Yes. Am I prepared to go and take the necessary, qualifications and go and do the necessary study in order to qualify for that? Yes. Hence, to stretch myself. But most people would, if they're not stretching themselves, would that be again back down to the fake syndrome, or would that be just down to procrastinating?
So if they're not stretching, then yeah, it could be that they're just not interested in it, but it could also be that it might trigger their imposter syndrome, that they fear making mistakes. So rather than risk making a mistake, they just avoid the situation completely, which is what I did with leadership. I went away and did a PhD instead of risking making mistakes in being a leader. Of course, the idea that if I make a mistake, then I'm a failure, then I'm worthless, and then when people find out, then it's going to be drama and humiliation. So that's emotionally what's
I mean,
going
I
on.
had, in my very, very early days of mentoring, one of the first clients that I had was a subsidiary of GKN, a major blue company. And the MD wanted me to mentor a sales manager who had been offered the position as a sales director, but he had declined on a number of occasions, and I was chucked in the deep end. I hadn't done any mentoring, I must admit, at the time. And I said, I know nothing about this, so I can't help you, find somebody else. And he said, no, I feel you got the knowledge and the skill set to persuade our sales manager into taking the post. And I said, really don't think so. But then when he showed me how much he was prepared to pay me to persuade him, I said, well, in that case, are you really genuine? You got to pay me that figure. He says, yeah. I said, what if I can't? He said, well, I'll give you 3 months. If you fail in 3 months, I'll give you half the amount. And I thought, okay, where do I sign? And it took me 3 weeks to persuade the person to take the job. And the reason he was refusing, again, back to the fake syndrome, he was scared that if he took that job up, all the other directors, university backgrounds from Oxford, Cambridge, he was the only guy that was brought up on a council estate with just a bare minimal qualification. And he had worked his way up into the sales manager's position, had been there, and he was comfortable because the people around him were people of his own caliber. And he felt he was going to be the laughing stock of the boardroom, that he wouldn't be able to even sit and eat or drink with the people, that they'd be looking down at him. And I tried everything for 3 weeks trying to persuade him. No matter what I did, he just refused point blank. No, you're wasting your time, wasting time. And one last throw before I quit was out of my briefcase 3 weeks later, we're having the conversation, and I said, do you realize that your managing director has got so much confidence in you that he's prepared to pay me equivalent to, like, 4 times your salary? And he looked at me a bit bemused. So I took out the contract, showed him the contract, and he goes, that figure's not real. I said, that's real. That is, he says, he's paying you that much. I said, no, that's how much confidence he has in you to take that job. It's not what he's paying me. He has that much confidence in you, and you're saying they're going to laugh at you because of that. Why would he be putting that sort of money just to get you to say yes? Because he obviously values you more. He then, within a couple of minutes, got on the phone so we can go and see the managing director. Half an hour later, we were in before the managing director, and his question was, is this contract genuine? And when the managing director said, Mo, I told you this in confidence, you're not supposed to show him this. I said, well, facts have to come out. And they said, yes, it's genuine contract. And this, after about 10, 15 minutes, reflected on himself, he took the job. But it just shows, at every level that there is that fake syndrome without realizing what's going on. And we're punishing ourselves constantly by undervaluing ourselves in a real way.
That's it. That's exactly it. And that was it. He would feel isolated. He would feel different. He would feel like he didn't belong there, like he didn't deserve to be there. And what happens was, as people, this is why imposter syndrome affects successful people more. As you get more and more successful, as you rise through the ranks, that the things that you're asked to do, the skills you're expected to have, gets larger. And of course, that can then trigger the imposter syndrome. For example, you might be very good technically skilled, you can lead a team of technical people, then to be promoted to an executive position where now you have to oversee different divisions, there might be something in that. Maybe it's finances, and you think you're terrible at finances. Or, for example, if you've come up through the managing from the human resources role, and suddenly now you're managing a marketing department, and now your creative abilities are being questioned, or there's expectations, all those sorts of things. So this is why it shows up more as you get more and more successful, because you're expected to take a greater role. And from entrepreneurs as well, that's exactly the same thing, because you have to have so many skills in that realm, and what we can do is just avoid one here, avoid one another here. So yeah, perfect, exactly.
Okay, let me just check some of these other ones. I'll carry on. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, sure. Okay. So so the next one way to reduce imposter syndrome is if you notice in yourself that perfectionism is really the thing that stresses you out. Then what you've got there is the fear of making a mistake. Makes you a failure, makes you worthless. So it's coming back to that. So if you find that making mistakes is the thing that wakes you up in the middle of the night, then what you can do to kind of desensitize yourself to that is to start making deliberate mistakes. This is going to feel horrible to start with. It really is. Yeah. But what you do it very small. Like if you've got a report, you put one deliberate spelling mistake in. And you know, if somebody says, hey, you spelt that wrong, say, thank you very much. Okay, I'll change that straight away. Thanks for pointing it out. But what you'll do is you'll make it now, not in anything, not in a way that puts anyone in danger or will, you know, compromise the operations in any way, but just small mistakes like that, and you just kind of are customizing yourself to, yes, okay, I made a mistake and the sky didn't fall in. You know, they didn't throw me out of the office because I made a spelling mistake. And gradually that will just take the edge off the perfectionism. And if you notice that it's perfectionism, then you can really work on, yeah, I don't hold myself to perfect standard. I'm allowed to be a human being. So that's a great way to help with perfectionism. Oops, I didn't press that. So yeah, that's it. Fail. So another thing we can do for a different form of imposter syndrome is adaptation. So when I was talking about the social skill earlier, what happens when you, with imposter syndrome, you have a vigilance, you're looking out for making mistakes. Now, if you're having imposter syndrome about, you think you've got poor social skills and you think you're a terrible person because you're obviously you make a mistake and you're worthless, that's the route that it goes, then what you can do is learn some adaptation. So in social skills, it's like you've got a meadow full of long grass and you've been told there's snakes in the grass and you've got to cross this meadow. So you're going to go very, very slowly, hypervigilant. You're going to jump at every twig in case it's a snake and every rustle of a mouse running away. And you'll get across the meadow and you'll be absolutely exhausted and so tense and anxious, and you would have hated the experience. Now, if you have imposter syndrome around your social skill, that is kind of the feeling that you get when you walk into a networking room or a party. It's the idea of, oh my gosh, this room is full of snakes. I have to look out for them. And what we get is a hypervigilance. And when you and when it's about social skill, what you'd be doing is you'd be scanning the room and looking for any hints of disapproval. Anyone who's looking angry, who's looking like they might think that you're bad, anyone who's judging you. So when you're talking to somebody, you're going to be watching their face for a brief flicker. Now, we're getting into the realms of neuroscience here, because what you focus on, attention, is what your brain makes important. So because you're looking out for all of these, you'll interpret things, you'll interpret a neutral face as a hostile face. You'll interpret a thinking face. A lot of people frown when they think. You'll interpret a thinking face as a hostile face. So it's going to feel very, very uncomfortable. You'll see a couple of people across the room and they're laughing and relaxed and having a good time. And rather than thinking, oh, this is a nice, friendly place, you'll go into the comparing and you'll say, oh my gosh, those people are so much better than me. Look, they're all relaxed and happy and they're telling jokes and everyone's laughing, and you just feel more isolated and more worse. So that's the scenario when your imposter syndrome is around social situations. Now, the way to adapt for this, the neuroscience way of adapting for this, is deliberately making the choice to scan the room for friendly faces. So your habit is to look for hostile, go in and look for friendly faces. And the more you focus on, this is what I'm looking for, this, and this, gradually you'll kind of train your subconscious to do that. Now, in 2009, there was this brilliant study done, a psychological study, where they had a computer screen that had pictures of a big crowd of people, all sorts of different faces. And the setup was that they would flash a light at some random point behind this picture, and the subjects were to press the button as fast as they could as soon as they saw the light flash. Now, the subtle thing about this that they didn't tell the subjects is that they specifically chose the area where there were smiling, happy faces to flash the light. They never put the light behind angry faces. So as people went through this, their subconscious cottoned on to the fact that the lights were coming up around smiling faces, and it trained the brain to start to look for happy faces. And what happened was their social anxiety went down. So yeah, if anyone is an app developer out there, I don't think there's one of those. If you can make that into a game it will help people with social anxiety, I think you've got a multi-million-dollar opportunity there. So I'd love to see it. Right, so other ways that we can reduce imposter syndrome. A lot of the problem of imposter syndrome and feeling worthless when we make mistakes is the secrecy. We feel it's just us. So talk to somebody in a safe environment where you're going to be accepted. So talk to a counselor, a coach, a priest, somebody. Join a support group if you find there's an imposter syndrome support group. That's fantastic. If there's not, start one. And fundamentally what we need to do is reframe, you know, and what we need to be telling ourselves is my worth does not depend on X, like doing or, you know, whatever it might be for you. My worth does not depend on what I do or think or say. So I'll come back now to the question I asked. If you were here right at the very beginning, I asked the question just to mull around, what would you do if you knew you couldn't fail? I think that's quite a common one in motivational circles. What would you do if you knew you couldn't fail? Well, actually, if we knew we couldn't fail, we'd actually get pretty bored because we couldn't fail, right? So nothing would be much of a challenge. So we can make mistakes, though. And if we know that if we make a mistake, it doesn't mean anything about us, all it means is we're just learning, then the question of what would you do if you knew you were just learning, this is what will skyrocket your success. This is what will set you free from the anxiety of imposter syndrome. If you know that your mistakes don't make you bad, then you can think on a much bigger scale. You can take more risks because any mistakes that you make are just learning. So that's it. So thank you very much for listening.
I think I'll put a post up. Let's just go back out of this for a moment. Start sharing. It's amazing how energy sort of connects. I mean, I'll put a couple of posts up today that were relevant to this without even realizing that they were that they were relevant to this. But I'm just gonna come back, start sharing, come back to the screens. Yeah, I'll put a couple of posts up there this morning. One of the posts, funny enough, was the compound effect of either failure or success. And without realizing it, the number of failures that people have on a daily basis, weekly basis, monthly basis, is that they compound that without even realizing that, you know, one failure after the other after the other. And the cure for that, I put in a post, was stop looking at it as a failure. Look at it as my good friend Drayton Bird would always say, like, you know, you're out there, you're testing all the time. And it's only the winning formula that you find from your testing. You then take that to your winning formula and then you focus on that and turn that into a strategy. The rest were nothing else but tests. And I think it's this scenario that, oh, we're failing. It's just like back to the Thomas Edison.
Yes, exactly.
You know, a scenario that he didn't fail 10,000 times. He found 10,000 ways of not doing it the next time round.
Yes, because he was comfortable in his inventing skills. So if he failed, he didn't make it mean anything about him. Now, if he did, then he would have given up.
Yeah, no, we would be sat in the
and
dark.
we'd be sat in the dark and lose that round candles.
Absolutely, absolutely. Right, guys, let's have a look, see what sort of questions we've got coming in. Right, come on, guys, let's get some questions and see where we are. I know most of you are going to be replaying this later on, hence, you know, we want to get a small number of people in here. Chris, are you still with us? Any questions, guys? Depends return, I might be hiding in the corner. Okay, yeah, that's right. It's not always reading TC Gills. That's why Toastmasters, I always smile at people doing talks, so they feel better about getting up to talk. Excellent, very interesting expression. Experiment. Chris, depends. Rihanna might be hiding in the corner. Chris, I know you always hide, mate. All right, any other questions, anyone? No, nothing. We'll give it up because it takes a few seconds for the replay to catch up, so we're gonna give you a few seconds to come up with any questions that you might have. Any techniques to not pushing things
to tomorrow?
Yeah, procrastination again.
Oh, so the procrastination. So this is where you do things at the very, very last minute, so that when you present it, it's not your best. And that's really what's going on there, is that you don't want to show your best in case someone criticizes it, in case someone says that's not good enough or that's a mistake, and therefore you're feeling bad and you're feeling worthless. So really it's that attitude of my worth isn't dependent on this. Yeah, if I'm doing a presentation, it doesn't make any difference. I can screw this up and I'm still a brilliant, worthy, wonderful person. It's not going to hurt me. And I think that's the way to do it. Now, there are other reasons that people procrastinate. Some people procrastinate because they get distracted by things. Everything's more interesting, and that's a different skill. So there was a psychological study done on little children. What they did is they put them in a room with a marshmallow, an empty room, nothing to distract them. They put them in a room with marshmallow and said, we're going to go away for 15 minutes. If you don't eat it, then when we come back, then you can have 2. So it was really how people are able to resist the temptation, and that was actually a really good. It's kind of the executive control. It's a very good way of predicting actually how well they do in the rest of their lives. And the kids with high executive control would